was trying to figure out what the hell is all the hype about. So I went on my Spotify and I was listening to like some of her songs. I was like, Antihero's a little bit of a jam.
Sip and Chat Cafe.
Welcome to Sip and Chat Cafe, a safe space for stimulating conversations. No topic is off limits. If it matters to you, it matters to us. I'm your host, Atara G, and our producer, Motown Maurice. For more information about this podcast and more, please visit motownmaurice.com. So many of you don't know, Motown and I have written 2 screenplays together. We've collaborated on many projects, but we've got 2 full screenplays under our belt. We've been through multiple rewrites, contest submissions. We even got as far as a deal memo. And then we hit a wall and nothing happened. It's definitely an exciting journey, but then can be deflating when all of a sudden it stops. So our guest today has been through his own entertainment journey. Let's welcome CEO of Cubestream, Toby Moore.
Toby.
Hi, Toby.
Hello. Hey, happy to be here.
Yes, we're
Thanks.
excited you're here too. I understand that you are an actor.
Yes.
And when did you realize you wanted to be an actor?
Well, it's funny. So my dad used to take me to the movie theater all the time. And sometimes we'd go see a movie like 10 or 15 times. I remember when Ghostbusters came out. We went and saw that over and over and over. And then, just all these movies. And so I knew I wanted to be an actor as a young kid, but I remember when I was 13, I got off the bus. I walked inside and I was like, Mom, I need to talk to you. She's like, okay. And I remember seeing the look on her face. She's like, well, what's this about? And I took it so seriously and I was just 13 and she's like, okay. So we sat down in the living room and I just said, I want to be an actor. And she's like, okay, what do you, okay. And then that was it. I kind of expected her to kind of like get me involved with stuff because I was so young but I was also in the swim team at the time. And so there wasn't really, I really didn't start acting then. I just told her, and then just always in my head kept wanting to do it. I did audition for a play at the end of high school, my senior year, but I always had vocal problems, and I couldn't be heard from stage. I didn't even understand the concept back then that I needed to be heard from stage, so I didn't get the job and went into college and studied marketing. Actually, I was undecided for 2 years. I really just went to college to be on the swim team, really. And then, but my junior year, they forced me to make a decision, and I chose acting and auditioned to get in the acting program, and that's how it all started.
Well, that worked out then.
Yeah.
Yeah, swimming to acting.
Exactly.
You swam up to the stage.
I swam up to the stage, yeah.
So where did you get your acting degree from?
I studied at Northern Illinois University, and I was really lucky because at the time I knew I had to stay there. I wasn't going to go to another school or a conservatory or anything like that, and so I tried to get in the acting program, and so I took an acting class, which was just like an elective. It was anybody could take it.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember telling the teacher, I said, I want to get in the acting department. He kept saying, well, Toby, it's very difficult. They take students from schools where they only focus on acting, and you're just starting out, so that you can't just get in. You have to audition, and so he told me who to talk to, and I was really determined. So I knocked on the door to the head. She's the head acting teacher, but she also ran the department.
Okay.
And I sat down with her and basically didn't leave her office until she said yes, I could audition. She kept telling me no, and I was like, no, I have to. You have to let me. And so I got an audition and made it in.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
That's what determination will do for you.
Yeah. And I was really lucky because they did have, I went through, it ended up being like a conservatory. We did 2 years of voice training, 2 years of movement, and 2 years of acting, and then all the other stuff that goes along with it. They had 3 stages, so they always kept us doing plays, and it was a really great experience.
What was your favorite part of the program?
I really liked movement.
Oh, okay.
they taught us an actor's yoga, really, so that would open up your voice. And I've always been considered myself more of a physical actor,
Mhm.
where I would approach my roles more with physicality. And
Mhm.
so that really hit home with me, and I really loved doing that class. Obviously, the acting was my favorite part, but some of the training that they had there really got me interested.
That's pretty cool. I've been in one play in high
Hmm.
school. I also don't project my voice. I'm always
Mm.
being told, "Speak up, Atara. We
Mm.
can't hear you. We can't hear you." Even just my regular speaking voice is very low. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
You have a John Ritter familiar about you.
Do I really? A
Yes.
Yeah.
genre? I've never heard that before.
No.
Well, you said physicality,
Uh-huh.
and I love John Ritter's physicality. Three's Company. He's the
Yeah, of
greatest there.
course.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I like that. And yeah, you kind of remind me of him a little.
Interesting.
When you walked in, I was like, "Have I seen this guy before?" Because you look very familiar.
You even
Really?
look
And
more like his son.
yes, and now that he said John
Really?
Ritter, I can see it.
I've never heard this. This is interesting. I've heard a lot of things, but yeah,
Yeah.
John Ritter, I'll add that to the
I
list.
love John Ritter though.
He's
Oh yeah,
great.
he's
Yeah, he's
great.
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
yeah,
for sure, for sure.
Three's Company. So you graduate from Northern Illinois University with
Hmm.
an acting degree. And how do you get yourself to Los Angeles?
Well, so at the time, around the same time I got into the acting department at Northern, I started doing modeling work for an agency in Chicago. And so in the summer times, I went to Milan and would model there, and I went to New York City and I'd model there. And so I was very fortunate where I didn't really have to have a normal job when I was at that part of college. So I was just doing catalog jobs in Chicago, and they paid pretty well. So I remember my dad and mom, they were very supportive of me being an actor, but my dad kept saying, he said, look, if you're going to do it, you got to move to LA. He's like, don't sit around this
Mm.
town and, try to make a living as an actor. You got to go where the money is, So if you're really going to try to do it as a career. So I had the support and was working as a model back then. So I just bought a car and drove out. I drove out with two other actors that I graduated with.
That's pretty supportive of your parents. Like most people who say, I want to be an actor or literally anything with the arts, the parents are like, no. I wanted to be a ceramicist, and that was shut down pretty quickly.
A ceramicist?
Yeah, I wanted to throw pots. I
Uh-huh.
wanted to go to art school and make pottery.
Wow.
And everyone was like, "No, you're not. No, you're not going
They
to
just
do
told you
that."
no.
They told me no, and unfortunately, I listened.
Uh-huh.
I think sometimes we forget that we don't have to listen to our parents in certain
Mhm.
situations,
Yeah.
and that would have been one of them.
Well, it's never too late. I mean,
I still throw pots. I just don't do it for a living.
yeah, okay. Yeah, but you're right. I mean, I know I had a very supportive family. I know most actors that I knew didn't get that kind of support from their family. They told them no, and they would have to go do it anyway. So,
Mm. So you get out here,
mhm.
and what happens next?
So I was also lucky in the sense that my modeling agency in Chicago had set up a bunch of meetings. They didn't want me to come out here. Actually, they were the only ones who didn't want me to. They wanted me to model. So they wanted to send me to Europe and they wanted to do stuff like that. But they had called some agencies that
Mhm.
they knew in Los Angeles. And it was a different industry back then. It was very different. Things have changed so much. And so, but back then, they set me up with like 15 different meetings
Mhm.
with all these different agencies, and I met with all of them and found one that was a great fit, and started auditioning immediately. I started getting, between 3 and 6 auditions every single week.
Wait, the modeling agency set you up with acting
They set
agencies?
me up with an acting agency, and they had some kind of
Wow.
commission split.
Okay.
Yeah, that lasted a couple years,
Okay.
and so that's how that worked out.
Okay.
Hmm.
Even that's great. I mean, if you're coming out to LA, any help is help. That's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a fun experience.
Yeah. Those two people you drove out with, did you guys live together, get a place together?
We did, yeah. We got a place in Studio City,
Mm.
and one of them moved home actually not that long after. But it just, as fate would have it, a guy that I met from Venezuela who I used to model with,
Mhm.
he moved to LA, and so he moved right in with me. And her name was Rachel. We lived all three of us together for about 2 years,
Okay.
and then we moved and went our separate ways.
That's the smoothest moving to LA transition story I've ever
Is it?
heard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was pretty. It felt pretty smooth at the
That's
time.
really cool. So what was your first booking out here?
The first booking was it was a Showtime movie called A Separate Piece,
Mhm.
and I was very fortunate with that as well. I got the audition, and it actually, I was auditioning so much for about 6 or 7 months, and I was getting callbacks, but nothing was really happening. And I remember getting really frustrated at the time, but then, keeping a positive attitude. But then when A Separate Piece auditions came, I auditioned for a role that I didn't actually book. And then they're like, "Oh no, you're not right for this character. You're right for this other character." And so I auditioned for that, and they're like, "No, no, no, you're not right for that one. You need to come back and do." So I had like 5 or 6 callbacks for that one, and then I eventually booked it. The character needed to be a good swimmer, and I was a competitive swimmer, so it really kind of fit and worked out. And it's interesting because it's based on a famous book, so a lot of high school kids have to read this book in their English class. It's called A Separate Piece, and I had to read that in my English class, and it was a big deal for my English teacher and my family, because when we read that book, I got elected. This is my freshman year in high school, to write the author. His name was John Knowles, and wrote him and invited him to come speak at our class. He didn't make it, but he wrote us back, and so I always had a special connection with that book.
Did you ever write him again and tell him you were?
No, I didn't, and you know what? I think he passed away by the time we filmed it.
Aw.
So
That's pretty cool though. That's like a nice. That's a
yeah,
nice memory how
yeah,
that worked out.
yeah. It was pretty.
Yeah.
It was interesting.
I imagine, like you said, you had to go or 5 or 6 auditions for that.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could handle the highs and lows of acting. Like I know quite a few actors, and I just don't see how you guys manage with, like, life in itself can be disappointing, but how do you deal with the constant disappointment in acting?
How do I deal with it? It's really tough, and back then I was able to get through it really easy. I always told myself, well, if I'm getting callbacks, then that means eventually one day I'm going to work, and so I kept a positive attitude. But then even years after A Separate Piece, when I was auditioning, I probably went through times where I didn't take it so well, where I would cry myself to sleep, or just be
Yeah.
really, really upset about how things were going. And so it's just been an up and down. Sometimes I'm great with it, sometimes I'm not, and I think I'm to a place now where I think I'll be fine with it for the rest of my life. But
Motown, I'm going to ask you to chime in on this because I know you have gone on your fair share of auditions. I've helped you with them. How do you manage not getting a call back or not getting casted, or just the disappointment?
You kind of become immune to it. It's a part of the process. You have to, because no matter who you are, you're not going to book everything. It just becomes a part of you. Yeah, you get used to it. That's it. That's it. You can't have high expectations. No, I think there's a moment where you can allow yourself to imagine what it would be like to book this commercial, to be a star in this film, and you take that good energy into the auditions and you just kind of leave it behind you.
And move on.
Yeah, like the sides that you're using to prepare with, when you're done, rip it up, throw it away. I don't know, you have to move on to the next. You just cannot dwell. You are damaging yourself by dwelling and wishing to get this role. The faster you can forget about it is the better. And there's another mindset. Your audition is just preparation for the next audition.
Sure.
That's really it.
I think we could apply that to just not dwelling, to just life in general, because I think a lot of us these days, I know I'm a dweller, and I've had to like force myself to move on from situations or even job interviews. Oh my gosh, I used to dwell on, oh, I can't wait for them to call me and give me this job.
Yeah.
And they never called. So disappointment. I think disappointment, moving on from disappointment, is a skill that I really think they should teach in school.
Yeah, absolutely. They really should.
So I hear that you booked something on Law and Order, SUV. which was one of my favorite
Oh,
shows.
really?
Yes, I will watch new episodes, old episodes I've seen 5 times.
Yeah.
Last 5 minutes of an episode, I love that show. Which one were you on?
So it's so funny that this episode, I always got to remind people, and I always got to remind people that this is acting, okay? So, in Special Victims Unit is all sex crimes.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but it was a great booking. They flew me to New York and got to work with Chris Maloney and Mariska Hargitay and Ice-T. And it was a really great experience. But my character, I played a fraternity president who was hazing people a little too much with pledge paddles, and was basically essentially had raped some pledges with the paddle, and finally got busted in the end.
Toby, I think I saw that episode.
Did you?
Oh
Everyone
my gosh.
everyone says that.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to go back.
Yeah.
and look for you.
It's so,
I know that guy.
Yeah, it's so funny the following that SVU has, because I also did CSI Miami. I
watched that too.
Yeah, and then did a Katie Holmes movie called First Daughter, and a USA Channel movie called Murder in Greenwich, and worked with some great people there. Maggie Grace, who played and what is it? She was in Lost, and then she did what's that movie called? Oh my gosh, you have to edit that out. She's the one with Liam Neeson, who where he rescues his daughter.
Taken.
Yes, yeah. She plays the daughter in that.
I have a special set of skills.
Yeah. So SVU was. It was a really great experience. And so what I was going to say is that the following they have is, so even the other stuff that I've done, SVU, that's what people recognize me from. They're like, hey, you're from SVU. I heard that years later, and I'm like, oh my gosh, the following, I mean, people love that show.
Yeah, I think it's the actors.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the shows are just ripped from headlines,
Yeah.
like everybody can, I think, relate to some part of every episode.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've been paddled, not when I was being hazed.
Yeah.
But it's a terrible joke.
Yeah. Has any fans taken it a little bit too far in terms of separating you from the character?
Well, yeah, sometimes people will just look at me different. They're like, oh, that was you? And I'm like, yeah, but that was acting, right? And we actually didn't film any scenes where I was doing that. I was just in the court stand acting, but people are just like, you can see in their face, they think, okay, you're a real bad person,
It's like, we just did an episode on therapy. And so I think those people need to have some therapy so they can tell the difference between reality and not reality.
Yeah, and I think they know, but then there's just some kind of disconnect where they're just like, is he really like that? Is he, does he really rape people with pledge paddles?
Well, if you're a fan of a show and you're a fan of an actor or actress, it may be sometimes hard to disconnect,
Mm-hmm.
and especially if you're a fan of the character in the show,
Mm-hmm.
it may be hard to disconnect that person from them not being that person.
Right.
I don't know if that makes sense. So even though you were just on the show once, they probably see everybody as this is who they are.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's a compliment to you because you were so believable.
Yeah. It's fun seeing people, most people, they understand though.
Yeah.
So
most people. We
people.
would hope.
Yeah.
So we talked earlier about the determination that it took for you to get into your acting,
Mm-hmm.
into the acting department at school.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to segue that into your father's book, Playing with the Enemy.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit about what his book is about? I know it was very successful. You had 12 to 16 reprints.
Yeah, well, the story was really interesting, and it was based on my grandfather's story. So it's interesting. My dad grew up playing baseball, and his father, my grandfather, was always very supportive of that, of everything he did except for baseball. And so he refused to go to my dad's games. He refused to really get involved. And my dad always thought that was weird because my dad was in band as well. And he would always got, my grandfather would go support him with that. So the day before my grandfather died, he had a heart problem. And my dad and him went up to Chicago to see a doctor. And afterwards they went to a steakhouse, a good thing to do after, having a heart attack. And my dad asked me, he said, why were you never supportive of me playing baseball? And so he told my dad the story. And basically my grandfather grew up, and this is what the story is about. My grandfather grew up in Southern Illinois and playing baseball at a small diamond, dusty diamond that they kind of built themselves. It wasn't, professional or anything like that, but he was known as being one of the best baseball players in the area. And he was only 15 years old, and he played the game like a grown man, is what they said. He controlled it. He was a catcher, and he just controlled the whole game and was excellent. And so one day, a scout from the Brooklyn Dodgers came through. The Dodgers were in Brooklyn back then. This is before World War II. And saw his talent and wanted to recruit him, but he was still too young to play for a professional team because he was 15 or 16 years old. And so he recruited him to play in the farm league. So he started playing for like 10 cents a day for these minor league teams in the area and started doing really well. And then when the plan was when he turned 18, they were going to bring him to Brooklyn and play for the Dodgers. And right around that time, World War II broke out. And so him and his brother were going to join the Navy. And right before that kind of happened, and he solidified that deal, the scout called him up on the phone and said, look, he's like, you're going to get drafted, or you're going to go fight. And if you fight, you're probably going to die. So what I want to do for you is I think I can get you to play for the Navy touring baseball team. And that way you don't have to fight. You can play for the Navy baseball. And so that ended up happening. And so, the book that mixes a little bit of truth with fiction, because my grandfather told my dad the story, and there's a lot of holes in the story that they really didn't know about. And so my dad had to fill it in. But essentially, the Navy and the Army, when the soldiers were in North Africa fighting the Germans before they moved into Europe, there was supposedly a baseball team there. And the Army and the Navy would play together, and the troops who were fighting on the front would come back, and they could watch a game and take their mind off of it, and then go back out. And so for a time they were playing in North Africa. And then when they moved into Europe, there was no time for baseball, and so they sent them back home. So the Navy baseball team was sent back to Louisiana, where essentially they were just playing baseball all day. They didn't have any job. They weren't, some of the guys they were all going to be pro baseball players. So, but at the time, the Germans were winning the war in the Atlantic. They had hundreds or maybe even thousands of U-boats, which were submarines, and they were communicating with each other with a device called the Enigma decoding machine. And there's actually been some movies made about that.
Red October.
Cool. Well, that was Russian. That was
sorry.
Yeah.
But I heard U-boat.
U-boat, yeah. There was a Matthew McConaughey movie. I forget what it's called. Maybe U-5701 or something like that. But there was another one that was strictly about the Enigma machine. But the Enigma machine was really considered one of the first text messaging devices. Mm-hmm. And so the Nazis were able to basically kind of text each other. It was a huge machine, but the Allies couldn't decode. They couldn't figure out what they were talking about.
I saw that movie mm-hmm. where these guys are always trying to decode the messages. Mm-hmm. They're intercepting the messages and they're trying to decode it. Yes. I think I saw one of those movies. I don't remember the name of it, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, so that was big technology at the time. And so the Allies really wanted to capture that so they could learn about it, decode it, and figure it out. And so there was a U-boat called the U-505 that actually was captured off the coast of Africa, and when the Allies captured it, it was really a big deal. I mean, to capture one of these things, it took an aircraft carrier and airplanes in the sky and destroyers. Just to capture one of these was just a huge deal. So they captured one called the U-505, and they didn't tell anyone about it. And it was really kind of it was a heroic endeavor, because when the Nazis knew that they had been captured, they set traps all over to blow it all up. But the Allies boarded the ship, and somehow the traps didn't work, and they were able to capture all the submariners and tow the boat back to Louisiana.
Which is where the baseball
which is where the baseball team was. Yeah.
Okay, this is
Yeah.
getting good.
Yeah. So the baseball team, they weren't doing anything but playing baseball, and so they were told by a captain that they're gonna have to guard a group of top secret prisoners, Nazi submariners, and so they did, from what we can tell. And the Nazis, they were thrown into a camp, and the camp at that time was not your regular prison. I mean, they were allowed to read books, and they got good food, and they were treated really well. But they were still prisoners of war, and they were held against Geneva Convention. And the reason they did that, Convention Code, you're supposed to inform the other side, hey, we got these troops, we got these soldiers, sailors, and they didn't. And the reason why is because they didn't want the Nazis to know that they had captured the Enigma machine. And so they were there. The baseball team ended up guarding them, and the baseball team was really upset about it. They're like, well, hey, we're supposed to be playing baseball, not guarding. We're getting ready for after the war when we're all going to be pros. So they ended up teaching the Nazis how to play baseball.
I knew it.
And so there's this whole story there where they're teaching them how to play baseball. And towards the end of the war, there was talk. The U.S. military they weren't sure if they wanted to tell anyone that they had held them against Geneva Convention Code, and there were rumors that they might execute them to cover up for the fact, for what they, for hiding them. And that didn't happen. But and this part of the story, we don't know how much of it is true, but what they did is, well, actually there was a game. And so what they did is to kind of publicize it and make sure that, like my grandfather in the book, to publicize the fact that they had these Nazis here to ensure that they wouldn't get killed. They said that they were going to have a friendship game, now that the war was over now. And so they wanted to have a friendship game, the Nazis versus the Americans, or the Germans versus the Americans. And I guess some people from the town showed up and watched a game, and they had a game, and
who won?
I think the Americans. Yeah, definitely. But then, at the end of the game, my grandfather slid into home base, had hit a home run, and he broke his ankle pretty bad.
Oh my gosh.
And so they ended up, so the Germans were sent home, and he ended up going, I don't know why, but he ended up going to New York and being at a hospital there, and was told that by the Dodgers eventually, that they weren't going to take him anymore. So that really was a huge disappointment for him, and he became, for a time, a pretty bad alcoholic. And the story goes on, but then he got a chance, and he actually ended up playing for a farm league for the Pirates, and you have to read the book for the rest of the story. But
yeah, I will read the book. What is your grandfather's name?
His name was Gene Moore.
Gene Moore. Mm-hmm. What an amazing story.
I have 2,000 of the books in the garage, so if you want, I can send you one for free.
I would love to. Will you sign it for me?
Yeah, sure.
That is actually a really amazing story, because not only are you learning so much about that history, World War II, mm-hmm. You're learning a lot about baseball. I have never heard of a farm league. And I like that it's coming from someone who is actually there, but not like, part of the government or the military. It's just a baseball player, and this is what happened to him. Yeah,
it was a fun story to work with.
And so I guess that was so painful for him, he couldn't go watch his son. It was too painful.
Exactly. Yeah. So he didn't tell my dad that story until the day before he died. The next day, after they had seen the doctor, and the doctor said he's fine, fell over and had a heart attack and died. And my dad learned all that. And so he has a letter from the Pittsburgh Farm League that I still have. It's framed, mm-hmm. and we kept it. And so we know that it did happen.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
There's a radio show I listened to on KCRW or NPR, who I can't remember the name of the show, but it's like Stories from America, and it's just like two people. It would be like a mother and their daughter, and they're telling a story of something that happened. Mm-hmm. This sounds like this would be perfect for that.
Yeah, and there was a lot of, I don't think it was on that show, but there was a lot of shows like that interviewed my dad at the time, and
that's a great story.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I liked it too. I mean, we're still hoping it gets made into a movie.
Well, yeah, that's what I was gonna get on to. I know it's difficult, again, so disappointing to like almost taste it being made into a movie, and then everything slows and stops. And so for you, it was a 10-year journey.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it was a long time. So when my dad published the book, got found a publisher. It was around 2006,
Mhm.
and at the time I knew, I was like, this would be a great to turn into a movie. And I was thinking of Sylvester Stallone and Rocky, how he had written that screenplay and won an Oscar for it. And I was thinking
Mhm.
about Matt Damon and how he had written Good Will Hunting, or him and some other people, and got an Oscar for it. So I was like, I could turn this into a screenplay, and this will be the vehicle to take me to the next level as an actor. And so I started taking some writing classes and really embarking on writing that story. And I didn't know much about it at the time, but I knew that I was going to need to find a production company that would produce the movie. And so, as luck would have it, there was just right down the street from where I lived in North Hollywood, there was a company called White Light Entertainment. And I met a producer there at a Starbucks not far by, and he had seen me in a movie called Murder in Greenwich. She's like, "Hey, you played Tommy Skakel in that USA Channel movie," and I said, "Yeah, yeah." He goes, "Well, great job." And I said, "Well, hey, what do you do?" And he's a head of development for White Light Entertainment, which is owned by a guy named Jerry Mullen, who had produced all of Steven Spielberg's stuff in the 90s. And last movie he did with him was Minority Report, and they were putting together a slate of films. And I said, "Oh, you got to hear about my dad's book. Can I get a meeting?" And he said, "Well, yeah, sure." So I scheduled a meeting with him, and I showed up at his office, and I pitched him my dad's book. And I didn't show him the screenplay, but I just said, "Look, I'm writing the screenplay, and I'd love to get this made." And he goes, "Well, let me read the book." So my dad sent it out to him, and he just fell in love with it. And so they wanted to make it their number one, their first movie that they produced. So even though I think they had a slate of like 12 or 15 movies. So he ended up rewriting it, what I had done, and I co-wrote it with him, and really moving towards getting that made. And so once it took about 3 months to get the first draft done, and then we moved on to just refining it and making it better. But during that time, he was talking to financiers, and he was gonna get it made. And so that whole process was frustrating because that was around 2006, and he kept on. He's like, "Okay, well, we're gonna make it this spring," and it'd be November. It's like, all right, so we'd be working, and then spring would come around. He's like, "Oh, we got to push it back to summer," and then summer would come around. "Oh, we got to push it back to fall," and then it's next year, and that went on for 3 years. But then by 2009, he had gotten some people who were pretty credible to do it, to finance it. And so we went up, and we were going to film it in Vancouver. We did all kinds of location scouting there. We had auditioned all kinds of actors, and started pre-production with it. And then abruptly, that guy got let go of White Light. And when that happened, everything fell apart. And it's so interesting because White Light actually never made any movies. It was this production company that was there, and they had a staff, and they were getting paid, and they were working, and they were getting things ready and spending money, and they just never ended up making a movie. It was the strangest thing. I was so blown away by it. But that was pretty depressing. And then the guy who I was working with, he continued to try to make it for a couple of years, and then we went our separate ways. And then me and my dad and his publisher continued on trying to get it made. But it was a different energy.
Yeah. So, okay, let's go back a little bit.
Mhm.
So when the guy from White Light got let go
Yes.
and you had to pick up and go on yourself,
Mhm.
what was that like?
Well, so it was very depressing for a few months, but there was still hope, because although he was let go from White Light, he was still raising money for other films, and he was still going to be an independent producer, and he was out talking to people who had a lot of money. And so he actually made a deal with Jim Sheridan, where Jim Sheridan and I met Jim Sheridan over at the Chateau Marmont when this happened, and he agreed to cast me as long as and he would direct and produce Playing with the Enemy, as long as the guy, his name was David, as long as David had raised enough money for him to produce his passion project. And so David was raising money, and Jim and his daughter actually rewrote Playing with the Enemy. So the script that me and David had done was canned, and then Jim and his daughter rewrote the other one. Now, I don't know how much to be completely full transparency, how much Jim Sheridan had to do with that script.
Mhm.
I suspect it was mostly his daughter, but his name is on it. And I still have it. It's very interesting, and it was very different. My dad was very upset because of the story. He had changed the story quite a
Mm.
bit, but David from White Light never actually raised the money for Jim, and so then that fell apart as well. And that was.
Yeah, this is bringing back. I'm having a little bit of PTSD
Are
myself.
you?
Yeah, because you put your heart. I mean, the screenplays that I've written, I just poured everything into it. A lot of what, a lot of the dialogue and a lot of the characters have come from people I love in my own life. And I've said, okay, I'm going to base this character on this person. What would she say in this situation? What would she do? And so it's not just words on a piece of paper. It's your story. It's your life. It's what you love. It's what you care about.
Hmm.
Motown calls them our babies.
Yeah, they are. They really are.
Yeah, and it's like, so I empathize with how that must have felt.
Well, and PTSD is a big, that's a great analogy because it is, it's traumatic,
Hmm.
when you think something is going to get made or you have high hopes for it and then it all falls apart. And I know that when it fell apart with Jim Sheridan, I knew that I'd really got very upset over it.
Yeah.
Because by that point it was 2012 and years had passed. And so what I was most upset for was I started focusing so much on Playing with the Enemy, putting less focus on auditions. And I was like, oh, I screwed up. Like I should have just kept on, like, just only been on auditions and kept booking
Mhm.
jobs. But I went this other route. And so it really hit me pretty hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry you had to go through that.
Oh, well,
But
you know what? It's fine now, so
yeah.
everything comes full circle and
Mhm.
it's,
It's tough. I think one day we'll all get our movies made.
yeah, I think so.
I think we can all go to each other's red carpet events and
Yeah,
screenings.
absolutely.
So you and your dad decide to forge on and continue to try to get this film made.
We did. And, at that point I was starting to have doubts that it actually would get made, and we weren't working with any major players anymore. So we were talking to people who were just giving us the runaround, and saying, oh, we got the money, but then not returning calls, or they'd call and say, I want to option it. But then so you go hire a lawyer so you can, have a lawyer do it, and then they don't call you back, and you're like, well, what's going on? And so I got into a really dark place, and so I actually ended up moving back to Chicago area for a couple of years just to be around family. And yeah, I had all kinds of regrets. I felt like I had messed up so bad, and I remember just like being just depressed and angry all the time, just very emotional, and just feeling like a total failure. And I felt like I let everyone down. I felt like I let my dad down. I felt like I let my family down, because they had been so supportive of me being an actor, and I had such a great start, and things really were looking up. And back when I was booking those jobs, I mean, there was a buzz. Everyone's like, "You're going to be a star. You're going to be huge," And then, a few years later, I'm sitting in bed, just being a big baby and crying, and just being, just like feeling like a total loser. And so that went on for a while. And I remember getting in a lot of arguments and fights with my parents and my dad, and mostly because my dad was a very positive influence in my life, and he saw how dark and angry and negative I'd become. And so he continued to try to inspire me and say, hey, look, I'm talking to this new guy in Oklahoma, and he says he has the money for Playing with the Enemy. But I'd stopped believing in everything by that point, and I just was working a job and
Over it,
being,
yeah.
I was just super, super upset about it.
Your dad sounds amazing.
He was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, he really was. Yeah, he died in 2021, and
Oh,
that
I'm
was,
so sorry.
yeah, thank you.
My dad died in 2021 too. So
Did he really?
Yeah, I can relate to that.
I'm sorry.
It's
Yeah,
tough.
it is.
It's tough when we lose, especially when a person is like your when it's a positive person, a person that you go to. 'Cause
Mhm.
it seems like to me you probably went to, well, you guys were working on getting the screenplay done, but it seems like to me you probably went to him to talk things through and for advice a lot.
I did. We had an interesting relationship. It was mostly business oriented, but we connected on that level, and I would talk to him every day.
Yeah. My dad was a very techie kind of guy. So I'm like, what kind of TV should I buy? He's very into technology, but he also knew a lot about everything. And he also gave very sound, solid, practical advice,
Hmm.
so I miss that.
Yeah, yeah. It's so hard when you talk to someone and you lean on them, and then they're just not there
It's just
anymore.
like poof,
Yeah,
you know, it sucks.
it does.
So, how did you pull yourself up out of that dark time to end up here at this table with me?
Well, so I just got sick of being miserable, and I was causing all kinds of problems, and with the family, just angry all the time, bitter, I just become this bitter person. And I wasn't raised to be like that. And my dad was, before he was an author, he was a successful businessman. He did really well in business and a few different businesses. And he would taking me to swim practice or taking me to soccer practice or karate, all the things I did as a kid. Like, I didn't get to listen to music. He was listening to like Tony Robbins or Zig Ziglar or Jim Rohn, like all these,
Zig
yeah.
Ziglar. I dated this guy once and he
Uh-huh.
took me, I think like the second date he took me on was to see Zig Ziglar in
Did he
person.
really?
Yes, I was
What?
like, who is
As a
this?
second date?
Yeah, second
Wow.
date. He has these tickets. I'm like, he didn't tell me what it was. This
Yeah.
guy comes out, is doing all this self-help stuff. I'm
Yeah.
like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then after that is when I found out how popular Zig Ziglar was.
Oh, he's
and that.
huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's funny. That
Yeah.
is really funny, actually, a second date. Yeah, so I had always been raised around that, and I got a job in Chicago. We lived about 60 miles south of Chicago, so I was driving back and forth. And while I was driving, I just started listening to whatever I could to help bring me out of that. Because I'd look back at when I was booking jobs, and I was like, I was so positive back then. I was so happy. I was so excited and so excited about life. And I didn't let anything get me down. And people knew me that way, and I became this other person. So I wanted to get back to that. So I was kind of searching for the boy I used to be. And so I started just like, there's nothing you can do to change it. I mean, I can live in the past. I can constantly be upset, or I could, keep going and try to make it happen again. And so, and I was still at a very low point, and was struggling financially, and wasn't modeling anymore. I wasn't doing any of that anymore. And so I was just working a job and trying to save up enough to move back to Los Angeles. And and while I was doing that, for a couple hours every day, I would just listen into just as much positive content as I could to change that.
That's I think people always say you have to go to therapy, which I do. I do believe in therapy. Going to see a therapist, or whatever kind of therapist you want to say. I think it's important part of our wellness program, or however we want to call it. But I think also we have an internal dialogue that when I first started going to therapy, one of the things the therapist said to me was, I will need you to listen to your internal dialogue and write down what you're telling yourself. And I was like, okay. I started listening, and I was horrified at what I was telling myself. I wouldn't tell my worst enemy these things. But back to what you were saying about just listening to positive things, I really think that listening to positive things can help change your internal dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely.
You start speaking to yourself in that positive way. Because there are some people on YouTube that I started listening to, and I really like the whole self-help thing. I thought it was so hokey, but it's great. It's so helpful to have someone speaking positivity into your life, and then you in turn can pick it up and implement it for yourself.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in it. I mean, I think therapy is amazing too, but what you're living with and what you're telling yourself is a big part of the picture. If you're walking around all day and saying, "Oh, I failed, I'm just a failure," or I gained some weight, so I'm just this fat loser or whatever. You're constantly telling yourself those things. You really start to believe it.
You do.
And you start to act on it, and you start to make decisions based on those thoughts. And so I knew that. I was lucky enough to know that and able to see how far off track I'd gotten. And so, but it doesn't mean that it was easy.
No, it's not easy.
Yeah.
Especially if you're doing it on your own.
Mm-hmm.
But even still having like a resource where you can just listen to people, it's also good for people who can't afford therapy or who aren't in a position to go spend an hour a day to do that. You were hustling, you were working. You may not have an hour a day to take out and go do that, but you still found the time to find some sort of therapy for yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. That's really what ended up happening. And I developed enough strength and courage to move back to LA and start going again, but by the time I got back, I felt like the industry was completely different.
When did you move back?
In late 2016.
Oh, okay.
But then I went home again to take care of family. But that's another.
But you know what? You know what I admire? Your persistence to come back. Because so many people come here. I'm going to move to LA. I'm going to make it big.
Yeah.
They hit the pavement. It doesn't work out for them, and they go home, and they don't come back.
Yeah.
Because LA is a hard place to be. It's expensive. It's hard if you don't know anyone. But you've come out here and gone home, come out here, gone home, and here you are back again.
Back again,
so again, that determination.
Well, I just feel like it's just a part of me at this point. So, yeah. But so in 2016, and so when I booked A Separate Piece, that was 2002, and I felt like the industry was totally different. I think I'm not sure, but I think it kind of started changing around 2009.
What do you think the change is?
I just remember, I was auditioning for all these jobs that were on TV and film and paid well, and then around 2009, I started getting a ton of auditions that I never saw anywhere on TV or on, I'm not sure what happened, but exactly. I think SAG started allowing, really low budget films to be union films. And so agencies were being flooded with a new type of audition that maybe wasn't going to be on TV or wasn't going to be in the movie theater. And it was like new media stuff. And so I started getting all these auditions back then, but then like I said, I was more focused on playing with the enemy. But by 2016, that was all I could get. And so I remember coming back and getting an agent and a manager, and they're like, you go audition for the student film. And I was like, that's awesome, but does it pay anything? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, why are you sending me? Like, I used to go on Law and Order and CSI and all these. And they're like, well, you have to build back your reel because all that other stuff is old now. And so. And that's fine. I did the auditions, but I just noticed that that was all the auditions I was getting. And then I thought, well, maybe it's my agency, so I'd get another agent. And those were the type of auditions I was getting. And then they're like, well, you need to go create a YouTube series and get noticed that way. And you need to do all these things. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like a whole different world compared to what it was when I had first moved out here. So and that whole experience, I really started examining the industry, and I did a couple independent films, and everybody there on the film was waiting tables or washing dishes, and everyone was just doing it as a labor of love, and no one was getting paid, and it was so much fun and it was great. But then I started realizing, I was like, well, geez, I want to. If this is a part of Hollywood now, I want to create something that helps these types of filmmakers who are on their way, and who haven't quite gotten there yet. And if they're making movies, I noticed, I'm sure some of them have, but I noticed a lot of the ones on YouTube or whatever weren't making any money, or they weren't able to monetize, or weren't able to get enough followers to monetize. And so I started thinking, well, geez, how could we create something that would help these independent filmmakers? And so that's around 2017, 2018, I started heading in a new direction. And ultimately, it was really just so I could continue to be an actor, which is weird, but...
So I guess you're talking about Cubestream.
That's Cubestream, yes.
Cubestream,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So I have some questions about that. First off, I'm interested in how you got to that name, but we're going to get into that after we come back from this break.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
What people don't realize is that our ancestors were revolutionaries. So if you have Haitian blood running through your veins, you too have the DNA of revolutionaries.
The revolution will not be televised, but it will be streaming. You just heard a snippet of the 6-part docuseries Audacity of Host, which explores the Haitian American experience of Motown Maurice. You don't want to miss it. Audacity of Host is streaming now on Tubi. For more information, visit MotownMaurice.com. Ça passe! And we're back with Toby Moore, CEO of Cubestream.
Glad to be back.
Yes. So, Toby, I want to know, how did you come up with the name Cubestream?
Well, that's interesting. So, like we talked about, we were talking to financiers to make Playing with the Enemy, who never came through. So, around 2017, I started getting interested in Bitcoin and crypto, and I had some friends who were doing well in that, and I'm like, what is this all about? It's so interesting. And so I had heard about some filmmakers in Europe who had raised money for their films by doing what's called an ICO. Now, an ICO, you probably know what it is. For people who don't know what it is, who's listening, basically an ICO is called an initial coin offering.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot like an IPO. So a company who wants to issue stocks, they'll sell stock to raise money for their company. And so there were some filmmakers back in 2015, 2016 who had done ICOs to raise money for their films. And so you can set it up differently, but essentially these filmmakers had said, okay, well, we're going to create a blockchain token or a cryptocurrency that represents equity in the film I want to make. And if you purchase this token, you'll own equity in the film. So they were raising money by doing that. And some of them had raised, I think, up at the time, maybe, I think the most was like 250,000. And Playing with the Enemy had a much bigger budget than that. So we weren't sure, but so I started calling my dad and his publisher, who was a partner back then. And I was like, hey, we could do an ICO. And they're both, baby boomers. And they're like, well, what's an ICO, and how does this work? And so we started going down that path of trying to make an ICO for Playing with the Enemy. Well, during that time, I started researching all kinds of cryptos, and I had no idea. I had no tech background. I had no tech experience at all. So I'm like, so I just started emailing cryptocurrency companies. And I'm like, hey, my name's Toby. I'm an actor, and I want to do an ICO. Not really understanding how any of it worked. And no one really responded because they're like, what? A lot of them weren't really ICO platforms. Back then, Ethereum was. I think there's a bunch more now, but there was this Russian company named Byteball at the time who responded, and they were very enthusiastic about it. And so I was like, okay, so they said, you want to do an ICO to raise your film? We can produce to raise money for your film. We can produce the token for you, and you can do an ICO on our platform. I was like, that's great. So we started working with them for a few months, and maybe about 8 months. And they said, well, to really have a successful ICO, you have to write a white paper. And, so you hear of these companies who raised a lot of money doing an ICO. They wrote like 100-page white paper. And so I started reading all these white papers. And one thing they all had in common is whatever industry they were raising money for, they were changing the entire industry and the way it was the game was played in their industry by using blockchain technology. It wasn't really just about creating a cryptocurrency. It was about using blockchain technology to change how an industry works. And so the more I started researching white papers and starting to write about it, I was like, we're never going to raise the money that we need to make Playing with the Enemy, because we're not changing anything. We're just raising money for a movie and doing electronic tokens instead. Like how is that? We're just raising money. And so as we really got into it, and at that time, I was seeing how much the industry had changed. I said, well, if we're going to do an ICO and looking at all the successful ICOs, we need to build a platform. And I remember my dad and his publisher were like, what? And I'm like, yeah, we got to be. And they're like, I thought we were making a movie. I'm like, we are, but that's more the longer term vision. Now we're going to do a platform. And there was a lot of arguments about that. But we ended up doing it. And so we never did an ICO. and that's because a lot of U.S. regulations surrounding it, and it also is very expensive to have an ICO. So we did write the white paper, and we envisioned, how Cubestream could help the industry and change things for filmmakers. So we worked on that for a couple of years, and really it was that idea that got us the financing to start building Cubestream. So we never did the ICO yet. We're still planning on it, but it still might be off into the future. There's, especially in the USA, they're really kind of cracking down on crypto and ICOs, and so it's really hard to do one legally. And so we just kind of stepped back from that. But that's how we got the name Cubestream. So there's actually a company called Blockstream that is not a streaming company, and they're just they're, I don't know what they do, but they already had the name. I was like, oh, I wanted to call it Blockstream, and so I was like, well, Cubestream, and it really refers to crypto. And it's funny because there's no crypto on the platform, but that is the long-term vision, is that it's not about really creating a cryptocurrency. It's about using that technology to solve problems. And so that is the long-term vision of Cubestream, and that's how we came up with the name. So I was like, well, what's like a cube? Or what's like a block? It's a cube. So that's how we came up with the name.
So if I'm a filmmaker and I have a film
Mm-hmm.
and I go to your platform, how does your platform help me make my film?
So right now it does not help you make your film,
Mhm.
but once your film is made,
Mhm.
you'll be able to upload it, charge whatever price you want, and keep 60% of the
Okay.
of the income. And so what we want to do, and what's really makes Cubestream special where it is right now in its beginning stages, is we want to help filmmakers promote their films. So obviously it's impossible to promote every film, but we want to find the best filmmakers and really help them make money.
Cubestream comes into play after your film has already been made and you need like distribution and promotion and marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's I think in 2019, 2020 was the last, before the pandemic, there was something like 14 or 15,000 films that were submitted to Sundance, and they accepted less than 1% of them. And obviously there's a million film festivals out there, but it's very hard to get a film picked up by a studio if they're not picked up by a major festival. And so so accepting 1%, they only accepted like 150 or something like that. And so there's thousands of films that never really see the light of day. And so we're here to help those filmmakers have a place to showcase their films and hopefully make some money. What we like to refer to ourselves as Bandcamp for filmmakers. Bandcamp is a great company. They're for musicians. Musicians can upload their music, charge whatever price they want, and keep most of the revenue. And so we always thought, well, geez, why isn't there a Bandcamp for filmmakers? And so that's really what we set out to do. Cubestream is in the very beginning stages. We're still in beta, and we're still working out some of the bugs. We have around 200 films right now, but we're about ready to open it up. And most of these filmmakers are there by invite only, and some of them are there who weren't invited, but their friends told them about it, and that's fine. We've been testing and working out the bugs, but the next phase, we're really going to open it up to a few thousand filmmakers and really start pushing the content and hopefully make some people some money,
Is there any other projects that you're working on other than Cubestream?
Well, so as far as projects, I mean, there's the 3 screenplays that I wrote with my father that we want to get those. We're probably going to make those with Cubestream. And I mean, at this point, why wouldn't we? And so right now I am just trying to form relationships with filmmakers, and I love filmmakers. I love the film industry. And I never saw myself like doing something like this, but I'm having a lot of fun and I like connecting with filmmakers. And so that's mostly where I'm focused right now. Cubestream, we are interested in making movies. We want to make Cubestream originals. There already are some Cubestream originals, but we didn't actually, we just kind of helped a little bit with some of the filmmakers, but we didn't actually produce them ourselves. So that is the direction we're headed. And outside of that, I'm a syndicated columnist. So I write a weekly column for some newspapers, and so that's really the other project that I work on.
That's great. Where can we find that column?
Well, that's in newspapers, and I need to. I've written like 110 of them now. I've been doing it for 2 years. So my dad was a columnist, and he wrote a column called "Positively Speaking," and it's about being positive. So when he died, he's like, "I want you to take it over." I'm like, "No, I don't want to do that. I don't want to," And after I thought about it for a couple days, and I knew he wanted me to do it, so I took it over. And so it's mostly, I mean, I don't actually know how many newspapers it's in, because I'll write for a company and they may have several publications that they put it in that are like different newspapers. But so yeah, that's the other project I do.
Oh, I like that. I like the sound, positively speaking.
Yes, positively speaking. And we don't get into, I don't get into politics. I don't get into, it's just about being positive.
Be positive.
Yeah.
Well, we certainly need more of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people it helps, but it helps me, because I have to review these concepts every week and I have to really think about them and read it. And I'm like, wow, this is, so it helps me really focus in and really, I think it helps Cubestream a lot too, because I have that attitude going into it.
So you're not sure where we can find the column? Or?
Well, okay. So I haven't been updating it, but I have a Medium account.
Okay.
And I need to upload the rest of them. I kind of stopped uploading them because they're really just printed in local newspapers.
Okay.
So there's, I think I tried to add it up one time. I think those newspapers land on around 800 to 1 million doorsteps every week.
Okay. I have a Medium account.
Do you? Okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
folks, if you're looking to check out Toby's column called Positively Speaking, there's an app. It's also web-based. It's called Medium, and there's all sorts of writers on there. You can be a writer and a reader. You can create an account and write your own stuff, or you can go there and just read. So check it out. Look for Toby Moore, Positively Speaking on Medium.
Yeah, I'll start uploading. I have so many I haven't uploaded yet, because some of the newspapers, they were like, well, if you're going to put them up down the line, because we don't want our readers to stop,
Yeah.
Not that they're subscribing to that paper for me, because they're most certainly not. It's local news, but it's in those. So
Well, that's fair.
yeah.
I'm glad to hear there's newspapers still being printed somewhere.
Yeah, well, they're starting to. My local newspaper where I'm from, they just went to 3 or 4 days a week. They have or 4 days a week now. Yeah, that was just a new. So the trend is, I think, going to be all online.
So at my office building, in the mailroom, the guys used to come around every day with a cart and deliver everybody's newspaper. We definitely don't do that anymore. We've gone to company purchased an online account, so everybody can just go online.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the way it's headed.
That's the way it's headed. Yeah. So if people want to reach out to you about Cubestream or anything else, where can they find you?
You could go to Cubestream. You could email support@cubestream.com. I'll see, or you could email Toby@cubestream.com. That would be more of a direct line to me. And I don't know. Does Medium allow messaging?
I don't know.
But yeah, I guess the best way would be Toby@cubestream.com.
I'll test it out.
Yeah.
I'll test it out.
Yeah.
Well, Toby, first I want to say you're a lovely person. You really have wonderful energy about you.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Feel the same way about you.
Thank
Feelings
you.
mutual. And Motown.
Yes,
Thank
Motown,
you.
of course. And I want to thank you for being here today. I really enjoyed hearing about your grandfather and your father and see how they've rubbed off on you.
Yeah.
And so, folks, with that, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never have to miss a single episode of Sip and Chat Cafe. He has seen me do that every Saturday for months.
Oh, really?
He still laughs like he's never seen me do it.
That's a great ending.
It is.